G'day, welcome to Navadia. This video is something I've wanted to do for quite some time. It relates a little bit to my personal experience as well as some of the common themes I've seen in the online atheist community. Quick reminder, I am not a counsellor, psychologist, psychotherapist, nor do I have any training whatsoever in psychology. If this video causes you any distress or it makes you recognise something about yourself, please go see a professional. I also want to make sure you know that what I'm about to say is only my uneducated opinion and personal anecdotes, so please do your own research. The thing I've noticed is that insert religion here, people come out of their religion and proclaim atheism, and they tend to go through a cycle that I can only really describe as going through the stages of grief. I'm going to say something right now. The stages of grief are basically bunk science. There's no scientific evidence that grief is experienced by everyone in the same way. That's pretty much the general rule when it comes to all human emotions, which is why I advocate that you should never, ever tell someone their emotions on a particular subject are wrong. Listening to people's feelings is important. You can vehemently disagree with them and you can let them know that, but negating their emotions is one of the worst things you can do. I will admit that I've done that in the heat of the moment, and this is something I'm aware of just before you go off screenshotting things that I have said in the past while arguing with someone. Despite the fact that the stages of grief are considered to not be a thing, it does lay in a good groundwork for the topic, as a lot of the emotions that are common throughout the grieving process. Since there's no linear progression of the stages of grief, I'm just going to talk about them in no particular order. First of all, what is grief? It's the emotional response to loss. It could be anything from the loss of a loved one to a community, a relationship, a house, personal items, or even a job. Even if the loss was willingly taken up, such as moving to a new area, a person can still experience grief. And that's fine. Grief is also handled differently amongst different societies. For example, some societies have huge and elaborate burials. Meanwhile, in other cultures, such as the Indigenous people of Australia, they do not allow a person's name to be spoken or face to be represented. This is because they believe their spirit will be disturbed and come back to make mischief, or it could be a sign of respect for that person. Please bear in mind, I don't know if this is universal amongst the different groups of Indigenous Australians, but it is true in a general sense. That is why you will see warnings before a movie depicting Indigenous Australians stating that it may contain images, names, and voices of deceased people. I bring this up because men expressing grief can be considered weak, especially in our culture. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that grief doesn't just apply to losing a loved one, but it applies to any form of loss. In the case of becoming an atheist, it is a loss of something that may have felt like being an intrinsic part of yourself. Now that I've done the necessary preamble, let's talk about a couple of common pitfalls a newly converted atheist tends to fall into. I'm going to talk about Christianity because that's the religion I'm most familiar with, but some of this might overlap with whatever religion that you are or were in. The first stage of grief I want to talk about, which I will remind you is not a thing, is denial. This happens often while you are still within the religion. If you are currently within the stage, you are probably also experiencing a lot of shame, guilt, and fear. You might be watching this video right now because you are just curious about atheism, but if you are truthful with yourself, you might be starting to doubt. Whatever you do, don't dismiss it. Your brain is telling you something is not right. In Christianity, there's a lot of apologetics that will keep you doubting yourself. You often hear things such as doubt your doubts. The Bible is littered with verses like 1 Timothy 4:1, which says this: "Now the Spirit expressly says in later times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons, through the insincerity of liars whose consciences are seared, who forbid marriage and require abstinence from food that God created to be received with thanksgivings by those who believe and know the truth. For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is made holy by the word of God and prayer." This passage attacks the person you are. You know that you are not a bad person or insincere. But if you deconvert, you turn into this horrendous person. It causes you to doubt yourself, not the thing that you are doubting. This is a symptom of abuse and definitely helps keep you in the denial stage. People who start to doubt the Christian faith do so for a variety of reasons. For me, it was when I realized that the Christian God was a textbook abuser. I still believed in him for years after, but there was no way I was going to continue worshipping him. Others left because they didn't get what was promised them, which then removed the rose-tinted glasses. Others figure out that they are LGBTQIA+. Others decided to get a higher education. There is a strong correlation between education and a lack of religious belief. Other people left because they'd stopped going to church and their weekly indoctrination was taken away from them, giving themselves time to question. Others left just because they woke up and just thought, nah, I just don't believe in this anymore. All of these and more are valid reasons to leave. Yet, a person who is doubting their faith but is in denial is likely to say to atheists that they are brainwashed, or they weren't real Christians to begin with, or that they just wanted to sin, or a variety of other reasons to move away from the Christian faith. It is not often people who say these things will accept the explanation proffered by the atheist. If you are in the denial phase, you are probably projecting. Don't worry, we have all done it. You're not alone, so don't think you're a bad person for doing it. You're just human. So what do you do when you're in the denial stage? Well, listen to your doubts. Doubt the thing you're doubting, not yourself. Sit down and do some self-reflection. Ask yourself questions and answer them truthfully. Introspection will either make your faith stronger or it will destroy it. Either way, it is better than lying to yourself, because that is painful and very harmful. You may also experience bargaining. If you show yourself to me, I will believe in you. It is so very common in deconversion stories. Bargaining, at least in my opinion, is often the last gasp before you start to accept that you've lost your faith. Once you start bargaining, it's quite possible you'll never get your faith back. It definitely overlaps with the denial part, so my unqualified advice is to go see someone who is qualified to give you advice. The next stage of grief that I want to talk about is sadness. Sadness is extremely common with any form of loss. If you've just recently walked away from your faith, a lot of your coping mechanisms may have also been removed. Praying to God is a common way to work out your troubles. Meeting up with trusted members of your congregation for advice is no longer possible. Singing songs of worship is painful because you don't believe that message anymore. If your family is extremist, you might not be able to turn to them without a fear of losing them. It can be very difficult to process this loss of a big part of who you are without a support network as well. You lose a lot when you lose your religion. A sense of nihilism and dread may overwhelm you. Suddenly, you realize you're not going to meet your beloved grandmother in heaven after you die. You now suddenly realize that this life is all that you have. Evil people aren't going to get punished and good people aren't going to get rewarded. It's a massive shift that would get anyone depressed. The pain you are experiencing is real. My first suggestion is that if it gets too overwhelming, there's nothing wrong with going to see a psychologist. If you live in an area that is predominantly religious and you have no atheist friends, you can ring your mental health crisis hotline. In the pinned comment below, I will add a list of hotlines you can ring. If you can't see your country or your preferred counselling hotline, please feel free to add it in the comments. Something you might find that religious people do is they may diminish your pain by strawmanning evolution. I've had way too many religious people say that people who don't believe in God and follow the scientific consensus that evolution is a thing have no right to have emotion. They say things like, I do not believe we manifest that we are the eventual results of primordial slime, only concoctions of random chemical reactions and just moist robots whose every thought was generated by interacting atoms who would not actually know if they were conscious or not. Or from the same person, non-hypocrite atheist parent finds his child crying over her dead uncle. He is now soulless worm food and we are all future soulless worm food. Use your brain and do not be emotional like those religious people who would say he lives on. I will not teach you about Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or to be dumb and cry over soulless maggot food. Stop crying now and use your intellect. I've told you 1,000 times our emotions are just an unfortunate, stupid, and worthless flaw of evolution and natural processes. This attitude does not come from a vacuum. Someone or something gave this person the idea that atheists are cold, heartless, unfeeling, and inhuman. Where in fact, evolution proves that grief is common amongst other animals, including elephants, cetaceans, crows, non-human primates, and domesticated animals. All of these creatures don't know that the Christian God may exist, and yet they still grieve. Emotions exist to improve the likelihood of survival. It is quite possible that you are going through the sadness stage of grief. You will think back and realize you probably said something similar. You'll feel guilty. You might feel that atheists may not accept you. That's quite possible, depending on how toxic you were before you deconverted, but a lot will. Even the most horrible people can be forgiven if they genuinely have turned a corner. Megan Phelps Roper, the daughter of Fred Phelps and an ex-member of the Westboro Baptist Church, has come out and denounced her previous life of spewing hate towards the LGBTQIA+ community and instead fights for their rights. She has been embraced by the GRSM community and is now one of their biggest allies. While you're feeling down, remember that you are not alone. Losing everything can be actually a very liberating thing. You get to shrug off damaging and toxic parts of your previous life. You will meet new people. You will learn new skills. While you feel like it won't get better, it actually will. If you cannot cope, you need to reach out to professionals because being depressed with no coping mechanisms puts you in extreme danger of being radicalized. And the last thing you want is to replace something toxic with something as equally as toxic. And speaking of toxicity, I want to talk about anger. This seems to be the most extreme part of deconversion, and this is the part I want to spend the most time on. You see, this is probably the most obvious of all the stages of grief that new atheists undergo, in that it is also part of the stereotype religious people use to show how bad atheists are. The thing is, not only is losing your religion similar to going through the stages of grief in the Abrahamic religion, it is also analogous to leaving an abusive relationship. Despite what a lot of Christians, Muslims, or Jews will tell you, the Abrahamic God is really abusive. You start to realize the lies, the guilt tripping, the fear of losing everything, the sexual suppression, the misogyny, the misandry, misrepresenting basic science, the trauma that you underwent from stories of hell, the indoctrination, the instillment of hatred towards random people you haven't met. The list goes on. And you are angry. You are furious. Not only because of what happened to you, but you know it is happening to other people. That's empathy, and that's a good thing. Then you start to find out about things that didn't happen to you. The abuse of children and the fact that the clergy got away with it. People who are financially struggling were compelled to give what they could to an institution worth billions of dollars. Denial of healthcare to people in third world countries because they wanted to get an abortion. Or in the case of Mother Teresa, because suffering brings people to Christ. Faith healing, which has killed people. The spread of hate towards vulnerable populations. The slow march towards theocracy. That gets you angry. And frankly, it should. But here's the rub. You've entered the Angry Atheist stage. And this is where you end up playing into every single stereotype that is pushed on atheists. You pick fights with religious people online every 15 seconds. You reply to someone who asks for prayers, God doesn't exist. You buy into tropes like religiousness is a mental illness or religion is a delusion. It's not, by the way. You become, frankly, the biggest asshole you could possibly be. And that's actually perfectly normal. It's a reaction to loss. As I mentioned earlier, your coping mechanisms have been ripped away from you, so you lash out. But just because that's normal, it doesn't mean it's good. Behavior like that will alienate you from the more moderate and open-minded atheists who've gone past the Angry Atheist stage. And these people are the ones that will be able to help you through this transition the best. You'll find online communities where the Angry Atheist mindset is not only rejected, but encouraged. These communities are toxic, and I mean toxic. And toxicity begets toxicity. I've seen personal friends get dragged into some of the subsets of community that I'm in and become radicalized. Not to the point of extremism, but definitely tribalism. Because here's the thing, there's a term that my friend Ocean Kelto coined, which is known as latent Christianity. He goes into it in this video here, or in the description below because YouTube's iCards are about as reliable as my first car. Basically, he defines latent Christianity as carry-on luggage that sticks around in the back of your mind. It can be as obvious as a lingering fear of hell to something more subtle as an unwillingness to question a person of authority. Other examples I've noticed is an attitude of, I'm right and everyone else is wrong. This arrogance comes straight from Christianity. While I don't agree with Ocean's theology as he is a polytheist, I don't hold that I'm right and he's wrong. I'm more than willing to accept that I could be wrong as more information becomes available in the future. However, some atheists replace their deity with science. While I do think that science is a much better foundation to base your life upon, some people worship science as if they've replaced the word Yahweh with the word science. Some of the most transphobic people I know of are atheists because they can't square old science with new science regarding gender identity. There is a raging misogyny problem within the atheist community. All I have to do is point to David Silverman and how revered he is by a large number of atheists. There's also hero worship amongst atheists. We even call Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett the Four Horsemen of Atheism. These are all examples of latent Christianity. If you are a recently deconverted atheist, please keep in mind that a lot of damaging thoughts and behaviours that were taught to you as a kid will pop up periodically. It took me years to stop slut-shaming. I've had friends tell me that the XJW online community behaves exactly in the same way as Jehovah's Witnesses in the sense of gossiping, lying, and backstabbing. Simply knowing that you will continue to unconsciously hold on to parts of your religion can help a lot to untangle the damage done to you as a kid. Learning how to do self-reflection is important. There's also a common pitfall amongst atheists, especially in the Angry Atheist stage where arrogance is a thing. And holy shit, can atheists be arrogant? A lot of atheists think, I was able to deconvert from my religion, so I'm super smart and I cannot be hoodwinked again. Wrong! So very, very wrong. Because you are able to escape from religion A, it does not mean that you are immune. In fact, you're probably more vulnerable to be brought into another damaging religion or something that is religion adjacent. One thing that leaving religion doesn't teach you is critical thinking skills. It is not uncommon for ex-cult members to be sucked into another cult. I've witnessed it myself on several occasions where ex-evangelicals end up in an MLM or anti-vax or just even uncritically consuming media such as OAN, Fox News or Newsmax, and now they're a QAnoner and worshipping Trump. I have also seen atheists become genuine bigots against religious people to the point where their behaviour is comparable to evangelicals. This is a common pitfall and I really want to bring this to your attention so you are aware that this can happen. As you leave your religion, you need to catch up on lost time. You need to go on a crash course on learning critical thinking skills. One of my favourite go-to podcasts is The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. You also need to learn what propaganda is. I love the website Media Bias Fact Check. It is excellent to gauge how biased and accurate a media outlet is. Learn logical fallacies, but whatever you do, stay humble. Nobody is free from bias. Remember that Dunning-Kruger is a thing. The more you learn, the less you know. Listen to people. If multiple people are calling you out or warning you about something, the chances are they're probably right. Learn how to say I'm wrong and I'm sorry and I don't know. Learn how to take criticism without thinking that people are attacking you personally. Don't immediately go on the defense. This is just a general thing we should all work on, myself included. If you have just left a religion, you are at extra risk of toxic and harmful attitudes. Because your religion has been stripped from you, you are literally a newborn left in the woods, and it is dangerous. It is comforting to go back into a situation similar to your past life that has the same scaffolding as the religion that you have left. It is similar to why an abused person often returns to their abuser. Another thing about atheist arrogance is that there's a trope that atheists are more intelligent than theists. This is a myth that needs to die. I can tell you this now. I didn't magically gain 30 IQ points when I deconverted, and I'd be willing to bet that nobody gained 30 IQ points when they became atheist. There is no correlation between intellect and atheism. There's a correlation between education and atheism. But an educated person can be really unintelligent, and an uneducated person can be highly intelligent. Speaking of myths that need to die is that atheists are good people. That is also wrong. People who have never left the Angry Atheist stage or have never done enough self-reflection to shed beliefs that were instilled in them while they were religious tend to be assholes. An excellent example of this is my interview with John Richards. His behaviour was less than desirable. He was also an atheist. Atheists are an eclectic group of people who are united by one thing, a lack of a belief in a deity. And not even that. We can't even agree on a definition between positive atheism, who believe that there is no deity, to agnostic atheists, who think that we can never know. Just like any eclectic group of people, you'll have a really good group of people who want the best for you, and you will also have people who you just don't want anything to do with. Anyway, I have a feeling that I've strayed a little bit from the topic. I hope this video will give you some foresight to avoid falling into common traps when you have just come out or are coming out of faith. If there was anything I would like you to take from this video is this: your emotions are valid. However, you probably need to see a psychologist to help untangle the damage that was done to you in your past. In fact, I think anyone who's left a religious faith needs to go and see someone, because a lot of the issues that I've brought up probably wouldn't exist if mental health care was encouraged more in this community. Thinking about this, I probably should have titled this video "Go See a Professional." Learn to forgive yourself for the shitty things you said as a religious person. That's just not you anymore. Stay humble and recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. Remember you are at risk of replacing your religious belief with another dogmatic mindset. even if that thing is not necessarily religious. Beware the angry atheist phase, because that's when you are most vulnerable. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, night, whatever, and don't forget, don't give yourself the raw prawn. I also want to say thank you to my wonderful patrons, especially my $10 Redback Spider patrons, Lauren Hart, Aided Furball, Amanda Vogue, and Ross Devereux. I also want to say an extra special thank you to my $35 Irukandji patron, Zolfner. Again, if this has caused any issues for you, or you recognise something that you think that you can work on, please go see a professional. A quick reminder that I've also linked a couple of hotlines and help places that you can go and talk to a professional if you have some issues trying to find some help. Stay safe, everyone.